beginning. Okay, what's going on YouTube? PNG News Media here. And as a part of my ongoing segment about prison life, organized crime, stuff like things of that nature, I have a really good interview to you today. Today, we're going to be speaking with the former member of Nuestra Familia. If you are not familiar with who that is, we're going to learn a whole lot about who they are today. So without further ado, Mr. Mike, can you tell my audience a little bit about your background, such as the organization you were with and what years you were active, and if you did any time in the penal system, what years did you serve time?
Yeah, first of all, I want to give a shout out to PNG News Media. Please hit the subscribe button and the like button. Yeah, I first started doing my time back in 1995 for shooting into an inhabited dwelling. A drive-by shooting on some fellow Norteños at that time. From there, I started my career, county jail, San Quentin, Solano, other facilities from there. Was pulled as a Nuestra Raza member. Was involved in a lot of different things throughout that duration. Times I was experiencing the dismantling of the NR and the new leadership changes that occurred within the organization. Prior to me paroling, I ended up in Corcoran Shoe with one high-ranking Cat 3C, Jimmy Wino Zarowski, a few other Carlitos from Sanjo and Chilo from Sanjo, Sombras from Sanjo, and a whole bunch of other NF members when I was in Corcoran 4 before left, as well as Daniel Ashali Hernandez. So I sent to parole at that time in around 2000, 2001. I forgot the dates. And at that time, I committed myself to function with the street regiment. And I ended up being plugged out there in the San Jose area. And for years, I functioned pre-Black Widow, post-Black Widow. Was in charge of a couple county jails. Was the authority in charge of a couple prisons. Established my own street crews. I was an NF associate for years, working hand in hand with a lot of different NF members. Seeing all the politics, seeing the changes that occurred within the states and Fed faction. From there, the books were opened up. Was eventually supposed to be recruited into a position and undertake a whole new regiment. And my duration of time was from, as far as an active NR, NF associate, NF members, was from 1995 to 2007.
Okay. Now you said a couple of terms here. You said, you mentioned an NF associate, an NR member, and an NF member. Like, what are the differences? Okay, can you further define those terms? Like, for example, what is or was the NR?
Okay, the NR was a faction called Nuestra Raza. It was originally started, its expulsion date is known as January 22nd, 1984, but 2 years before that, they were already in the works of putting together the bonds. And what the Nuestra Raza was established as was, it was supposed to be a sub-faction, like a farm team for the Nuestra Familia. Because at that time, a lot of the NF members were being locked up. So what they did at that time, they were having issues with a lot of Northerners that were, or Norteños at that time, were on these main lines. And they were being oppressed by Sureños. At that time, a lot of the MA were informing the Sureños that their enemy were the NF or Norteños. So there was a lot of pressure and abuse going on. They were getting off a lot. In these main lines, they didn't have no type of direction, no type of politics or no type of direction. So at that time, you had a few NF members, Corny from Woodland, Copas from Salinas, and Brown Bob from Morgan Hill. They started to structure the 14 bonds, right? And the bonds are basically your due process rights. They're the ones that give you the direction. And what the bonds were supposed to be formulated for were the bylaws of the people in lieu of present. So therefore, the NR could continue to push the same lines and agendas of the NF out there in the cause for the betterment of the people on these lines and be able to govern itself. So that's how the Nuestra Raza, and their date was known as January 22nd, 1984. And at that time, that happened New Folsom. But like I said, the bonds were already being created before. They were already working it out. They had different policies, like back in Tracy in the 80s, they had a policy that you could only be on the mainline for 90 days and you'd have to get off. And they were already starting to school all these Northerners and Norteños. And so it took time for them to create this movement. And see, that's what the NR was supposed to originally be. It wasn't supposed to be no other organization. It was just a movement that was for committed individuals behind the walls. And you took the title hermano or bro. Those were the titles that NR members would identify themselves as. And if you were just a regular, like, Norteño from the street, like regular gang member that wasn't obligated, you were just known as a Norteño back then.
Okay.
Right? So you would have, and you weren't obligated under these bonds or formats and all the 7 phases that an NR Soldado is supposed to understand. But you were committed to defend the household, defend the people as a Norteño. So when it was time to get off, you got off. But a lot of Norteños, what they would do is they didn't have all these different procedures that they have now. You weren't writing like all kinds of essays. You weren't filing a report. You were either, they used to use titles such as A1, which was someone who was a strong sympathizer to the NR. And then you'd have just regular Norteños. So the NR were the ones that were pushing the politics, and all the Northerners or Norteños at that time would fall under the NR's basically jurisdiction.
Okay.
So eventually that got dismantled. It started going into, they started looking into it back in 1995, because what a lot of people don't know is the NR even used to have a CAT system just like the NF. They used to have CAT 1, CAT 2s, and CAT 3s, but there was no checks and balances to verify one's ranking. So first they dismantled that and took that from them. And what you started to have is a lot of these, like I said, like nowadays, before I departed in 2007, all Norteños and Northerners would fall under the bonds, formats, and same education. They fell under the same branch and union of set procedures and guidelines, right? Back then, only NR members were given that education, right?
Okay.
They were only given the bonds and formats. So they were the ones that would be upholding the law of the people. Therefore, a lot of Northerners did not know there was a lot of abuses. There was a lot of people that were using drugs at the time, and a lot of dudes were flipping. A lot of dropouts were slipping out to the yards. It was a different time there in the 80s and 90s.
Okay. All right. Now something else you said.
You can get to a yard, and there could be a.
Go ahead.
I said back then you could get to a mainline in the 80s and 90s, and there could be a dropout that assumed control of that yard that no one knew, and they could be running the yards. There was no. Nowadays it's a lot more stricter. There's a lot more cross checks and references, and so the NR was dismantled because basically it was to put them in their place. Because a lot of them started to feel like the NR was its own type of organization. And so the NF, was not going to tolerate that. There's only room for one organization. You can't have two splitter factions, right? Otherwise, you're going to have more internal conflict.
Right.
And the NF has had a long history of having internal conflict within their own organization. So to basically regulate the checks and balances, they decided to dismantle the NR, right? The Nuestra Familia, right? And allow Northerners and Norteños to have the same educational attainments that an NR member would have. Because therefore what it did was it would make they changed the titles from like a hermano and bro was now being called a Norteño Soldado. A regular Norteño was now becoming a Northerner. So the difference was one was obligated, committed to the struggle, which is known as the Nuestra Raza struggle, or La Raza Norteña, or the Norteño movement. They were committed to the struggle. Now Norteños, which were now being called Northerners, they were responsible to follow those same procedures. They were responsible to know these bonds, because the bonds are a due process to protect your rights and govern the people in absence of a real authority being there. And the only true authorities within the Norteño collective are the NF. Anybody who was a Nuestra Raza member who played an authority position is basically falling under these laws. He has basically no authority, but he has to utilize his laws to make those decisions, and he still has to justify this to a higher authority, which would be an NF member. So now, to put all the people in line as far as the Norteños and Northerners together on the same page, a branch and union where everything is parallel, they now started to allow them to have the same type of education. The same bonds and formats that were only given to NR members, now Northerners were being given that same information.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you had a lot of rogue members that were upset about it because some of them were involved in it from day one back in the 80s as NR members. And so they felt a piece of them was being taken away. They prided themselves more on being NR members than they did being NFs. And a lot of them at times were trying to separate themselves. You had a few individuals that tried to do that, and they ended up being in no good standings. So that was, that was a big change as far as within that was they started to implement El Norte law. They brought the 497 salutations, which was the dismantling of the NR. And all that basically for the NF was to put everybody in line under the same type of authority of the NF's umbrella. It's basically, like I said before, it's basically a control mechanism. We're going to have you guys in line. And now these Northerners were being given the bonds and formats. Therefore, they knew their rights. And they were encouraged to stand up wherever they were falling victim to abuses. Because for a while, don't get it misconstrued. There was a lot of solid NR members back then in the 90s. The NR was pushing a hard line, right? Which you would also hear the title structure, which meant organized. The XIV structure of Norteños. But there was also a lot of rogue members that were abusing their authority, using dope on the main lines or doing things to benefit themselves or making decisions that were personal or showing favoritism. And the NF caught wind of a lot of these situations. So, those were all excuses, but the main reasons why the NF dismantled the NR was to put them in their place. There's no room for two organizations.
All right. Now you mentioned something that the books were open and you became an NF member. Okay, so I take that to mean you became a MAID member. So can you explain, well, two things? What's the process? Like, how often are the books open? Like, what qualifies someone to become an NF? And then can you talk about your own experience? Like, when you became an NF member, like, how did you feel? Did you feel like Henry Hill said, hey, being this is being better than being the president? And kind of talk a little bit about that.
That's a good question right there. Well, at that time, I went through that transition to Black Widow. So they were opening the books to a lot of people that were on the streets. And so you had two different factions that were doing two different recruiting bases at that time. And see, a lot of the brass, they were over there in Santa Rita and Oakland jail. And so what they started to do at that time was when they were opening the books, they were opening the books to a lot of different people that were falling in line with them because of their potential to make money because they had just got federally indicted. So the normal procedure of how a lot of people were getting recruited into the NF was totally different than the past. A lot of them before were getting recruited up in the Bay. They had to go through different background checks. They had investigators investigate them. They go on a probationary period, all kinds of different things. So when all these indictments happen, my whole take of all this years later, right, is what the feds were doing was they were just trying to recruit as many people as they could under their wing, right, to fill their pockets before they got sent to the feds. So it was totally different. The different indoctrination. The books were open to me and a few others at the end of my career. And so my whole understanding, I'm not going to act like I'm some relevant or was no big time like leader out there or anything within the organization. I had no voice. You know what I'm saying? But I was involved in a lot of these issues that were going on. I was well informed. I was kept in the loop. And a lot of that had to do, as far as within my personal story is that I was out there pre-Black Widow and post-Black Widow. So a lot of NF members always had respected me for that. So when all these changes happened during that time, as far as the indictments occurred, I was still out there functioning as an NF associate. Now, what people don't realize, well, maybe they do, I don't know, but this is how it used to be. So if you choose to function out there on the streets, right, with an NF regiment, under a regiment commander or regiment leader, or you're reporting to whatever channel taking care of whatever NF business you are, and you're a Northerner or Norteño, you hold the same rank and status as an NF member. Therefore, you have the same responsibilities. Now, there's a little bit limit of discretion and authority that you have because normally you're going to be plugged in under another NF member. But to me, there was no changes because already within 2001, 2002, I already had my own crews out there in the streets. I was already generating a lot of money. So there was no change. I was just like I said, for myself, I was just trying to fall in file and follow whatever procedures and see there was a power struggle that was lightly going on at that time between the Bay and the feds. And see, the people that I used to report to and fall under, they were loyalists to the feds. Corny, Pinky, Skip, Tibbs, all these individuals. So they had visitors going up there every week getting directives. I can't speak on how, now that I reflect back on other areas, we didn't interact with other areas like Tulare County or Fresno or Sagrada because that's a big no-no. Because if you have regiments interacting with each other, it's a breach of security. It could potentially bring down all the regiments if someone flips. So your responsibilities within that regiment pertain to just you in that regiment, you and your channels. And that's it. And it's really no one's business. It ain't no Northerner's business. It ain't no North Daniel's business. You're not supposed to expose any information. So a lot of the things that I was involved in at that time, I kept under wraps because, in my own understanding and my own experience, I seen how people would get crossed up or caught up in the politics. So I was never trying to be someone I wasn't. I was just following rank and file, taking care of responsibilities, generating the money I was supposed to. If I stepped into a facility and it was not established, or if the people there that were holding a leadership position there didn't have the educational attainments or experience, I would strip them. I would fulfill that position. But other than that, as far as in all these changes that happened, I don't know how they're recruiting right now. But back then it was different, depending upon what era. Like you can go back to the 70s, 80s.
Mhm. So I mean, so when you get made, I mean, was there like a particular ceremony? And like I said, how did you feel? Did you feel that you just like, man, you're at the top of the world right now? What was it like for you?
No, they don't have no made ceremony. Basically, what's going to come back is it got sanctioned and established. And
Okay.
you know what I mean? And at that time, for me, as myself, I already looked at myself. I had been going through that recruitment process for years. So when it came back that I was supposed to undertake a regiment and all this stuff, and the books were being filled and all that, it was no different. Only thing that different is the limited, indoctrination as far as within the bylaws. I didn't get a whole lot.
Okay.
I didn't get, because of the recruitment basis, a lot of those that were getting on the streets, they may have their biblias and all that in their education, but you're not out there on the streets running the collection ceremonies. They're doing education. It's just, let's get down to business. Let's make money.
Okay. So I'll go down to money. Now, let me back up a little bit. I want to ask you this. When you were on the street as Norteño, doing your thing, making money on the streets like that, and before you went to prison, how much of a deterrent factor was prison for you? I mean, were you like afraid to go, or were you like, this is just a cost of doing business? Did prison serve as any type of deterrent for you before you had ever went in?
Nah, see, I guess my mindset is I thrived off recognition. I like that ego that came with being a hardcore gang member. So with my mindset, I ended up in prison by the time I was 18 years old, for a shooting. And I was already shooting at people. So my mindset was, it was part of life. I was already meeting a lot of OGs at the time, because at the era when I was out there in the streets, the Norteño uprising in the San Jose area, it just blew up. Anybody can tell you, late 80s, early 90s, especially early 90s, there was a lot of OGs that were getting out of prison, big old brochures tatted back, telling you about what it was like behind the walls, about how we're outnumbered. Like, they're on a yard with 15 homeboys, 100 Sudanos, and they're still taking care of business, or taking off their shirts, or getting off. And you're hearing all these stories, and you're starting to get a little bit glimpse of what the cause is about from these old time viejos, right? These OGs. So for me, I just thought it was the part of doing business. You know what I mean? Okay. And then you also had used to hear the term structure, which at that time was Nuestra Familia. And so I was blind as a kid. I didn't know what any of this was. Then you'd hear the terms NF. And the term NF, you did not speak about it on the streets, right? The NF had a reputation for just being straight killers. And you got to remember, at that time, when I was a young kid out there on the streets, they had just been indicted for like 11, I think it was 7 murders or 11 murders. I forgot the number, but this was around 1992, 93. So the NF, if you went around the county jail, no one would say the word NF. You would not hear it. People would be scared to talk about them. Or if they said the name, it would be very limited, because the organization at that time perceived as treachery. It was known, it was recognized. So me going to prison, I kind of already knew, and I was not scared. At that time, I didn't know what it was about. I just thought it was about just gang banging on Sureños, because there wasn't a lot of collection that you have nowadays, to where you're schooling the youngsters out there in the streets. You're applying the bond 11, which is to teach and school all those destined to the Pinta. You weren't getting that type of collection as far as what prison life was about, or about the cause. because a lot of OGs themselves knew very limited information. You just get bits and pieces of it. Things now change. You know, now you got youngsters out there that are fully schooled on the bonds. They know the full history. They know what they represent. They know all the history that's occurred between the NF and MA and Sureños and Norteños. But when I was growing up, it wasn't like that. It was just the cost of doing business. And we used to set trip more on other Norteño hoods, right? While we were out there on the streets.
Now, something else I wanted to ask you. Back when you were a Northerner or an NF member, did you see yourself as like, or I guess this is a collective question, like does the NF see itself different from the MA? Do Norteños like have anything that say like, okay, this was makes us different? Like back in your day, how did you feel that, well, I'm an NF member and we're different from the MA because of this?
Well, shoot, as NR members, we felt we were different than the MA. You got to remember that all comes from the indoctrination. And the first thing I used to trip off, right, back in my early career is how much the Sureños and the MA were like, they were different between NF and Norteños, but there's similarities too at the same time. Like the MA at that time, they would not take any initiative to educate their youngsters, to give them any type of schooling. They would just be conducting their own illicit businesses from what I would see. And you could tell that the MA would elevate their stature that of above of any Sureño, like they were better, like they were the elite. Whereas the NF would try to be a little bit more incognito. It seemed like later on the NF just started to act just like the MA. Like, you know, I started hearing terms, well, I'm NF, you know what I mean? You're this and that. But the different levels, like, yeah, the NF was put its schooling out there as far as the history, but they would always teach that the MA is a treacherous organization. They were a respected adversary. You know, they were never to be taken unlikely. You know, as much hate as there was between the organizations, never once have I ever heard about any, you know, as far as the MA being cowards. I've never heard any stories like that. Now, we did used to call them Moscos back in the day, right? In certain prisons when the NF was taking them out because they were dropping like flies. But when it comes between the two organizations, there's a little bit different type of structure, whereas the NF used to follow under a more chain of command and constitution, right? And a paramilitary structure following directives and orders. A lot of these MA members, they conduct their own individual business. So it's a little bit different and it's hard to judge the two. Because, you know, the MA is a very strong organization. All you got to do is look at Southern California. They got all those Sureño hoods. Not all of them. There's some that have gone against the grain, that have decided not to bank trece. I don't know as much about MA and Sureño politics, so no disrespect to any Sureños or Southers that are listening to this, but this is just from a personal recollection of what I've seen and what I've heard. Whereas the NF has more of a chain of authority structure to where it's more involved in the NR business and Norteño business and more of a control mechanism in a different way. And that has a lot to do with its indoctrination and the things that it's dogma that it puts out there about the cause, the betterment, about security. And a lot of us, we've always been outnumbered in the system. You know, there's way more Sureños than there is Norteños. So back then we had to have a certain type of chain of command and implement certain security procedures, like walking into and doing head counts and having an observation post. And there's different things that go into running the main line, different type of security patrols, different types of responsibilities that other factions ain't doing it. But we're doing it for our own security because we're outnumbered. And that's how we were able to be out there on these lines where there's maybe 15, 20 of us, yet there's maybe 100 Sureños.
Now, during your time, I know there's a split now between the federal faction and the state faction, but back in your day before it was, say if a guy was, did Fed time and he became an NF member, and then part of his case, after he did his federal time, he had to do, say, 3 years in the Cali pen, and that guy entered the penitentiary and say he was an NF member, and then he was made in the federal system. Was there like a way that you all can verify that, or will he be accepted as an NF member even though he was made in the feds?
You know what? That's I've never experienced it. And that's a little bit above my past pay grade, I guess you can say. But so
Okay.
if something like that were to happen, right, you're going to just
Mhm.
follow the channel procedures. If an NF member comes and is claiming to be an NF member, you got to go through the process to clarify that. If he ends up
Okay.
stepping into a county jail or a prison or whatnot, I've had situations where I was an NR member and an NF member showed up to the facility that I was in charge. And so this individual, the situation with him was kind of interesting because he had just paroled from the Bay, I think in 99 or 2000, and he was deported to Mexico. And then all his channels ended up being the ones that some of them had flipped and started working with the feds. So he was in Mexico, right, and trying to write his channels that they had already flipped with the feds. So he came all the way back to catch a case so he could report. So when he got there, me knowing what the NF laws were at the time a little bit and the procedures, and what I've been taught by other high-ranking Cs what to do in these situations, because it's a catch-22. If a C shows up, you don't want to sit there and get in any conflict or question his status or authority, but at the same time, you want to cover your own ass. So when that happened, I got it to do legitimately. I told him what the situation was, and I told him there's nothing really I can do for you. You'll be here to function. You're not going to be entitled to no household business, but we're going to acknowledge you. Anything you need, any questions, we're going to give to you. And if there's any type of security threat that you need to know about, we will let you know. But you need to go to the Bay, or we need to get a hold of Rita and confirm your status first, because there's a certain procedure that has to go off anytime an NF member comes into any facility, right? If you come in off the streets, right? I think I mentioned this somewhere before, but technically you're supposed to be on freeze until you can report to your channel why you caught a case, why you caught a violation. All investigations could be looked into. Did you cover all money expenses that you owed, right? And that goes from that channel to the SRG. The SRG will then from there inform the GOP, and then the GOP confirms that you're there. So it's a catch-22. I never personally seen it, but the one thing that I did see at that time, right, was immediately after Black Widow, there was a few individuals that got recruited in San Quentin. They ended up in an adjustment center with a few of the NF members that were on death row. They got recruited. The dude started working with them, indoctrinating them on the NF Constitution, and their names got sent to the Bay. And they got confirmed by a general at that time that the feds was not acknowledging. So what ended up coming back from Santa Rita, right, which is where all the federal brass were at when they were going into the indictments, is that none of these individual statuses were going to be acknowledged by them. And then the state faction adhered by that, right? And then I've also had a situation when I was the authority in charge in 2006, and there was 2 NF members that were supposed to drive up from different areas. One of them I knew was recruited in San Quentin and death row, so I was trying to clarify that issue. And the other one was recruited by the feds, but there was question marks whether his status was being valid. So at that time, the feds had already taken their sentences and went to the feds. So a lot of us were trying to get in line with the state, but a lot of them were sent to the short corridor, which is D1 through D4. So communication with the Bay was really hectic at that time because the IGI investigators were trying to shut everything down. So I ended up sending a wheel up to the Bay, right, to get to the short corridor to ask about these certain individuals, if their C status were valid. Now, what came back on me was the same one that the feds were saying they weren't acknowledging his status. The state was saying that his NF status was good. Now, the individual that was recruited by the feds, Pelican Bay, was saying that his status was not confirmed. So that's when I first started seeing the little power struggle as far as in the recruitment basis, as far as what was going on. So, but then again, like I said, I'm not trying to act like I was relevant. I was just following the rank and file at that time. And a lot of my loyalist beliefs were to the feds at that time, Okay. So, depending on what you were going through, there was different protocol procedures that were going on at that time. And you even had a situation around the same time because of the incommunication that was going on with Pelican Bay. The Salinas Regiment tried to claim incommunicado, and they wanted every regiment to report to them. So what they were trying to do is say that there's no contact with the Bay. And I know at that time, we were out there in San Jose. I was told that we were going to start reaching out to Skip. So even though we were trying to get in line with the state, the directives that were coming from there, we ended up reaching out to the feds. So it gets really political. Like I said, like it's a lot of it, like it didn't pertain to me. I was just trying to follow and file, do whatever responsibilities the people that I was working under, whatever they were directives they were giving me, whatever money I had to make, it was no different for me than when I was functioning basically for years. So I knew not to stick my nose in these issues, because if I did, or if I started to lean one way and show where my allegiance was, I knew I could get crossed up in that situation. And so a lot of these NF members, there were some that were coming out from the Bay at that time. There was like 7 or 8 NF members on the streets in San Jose at that time. And some were having directives from the Bay, and somehow they were trying to pacify both sides. So it was a crazy transition. Like, I don't know where it is now, but I know at that time, like, it's probably easier because they're back out there on the main line. See, back then they were the shoe, and they were limiting communication, and all the federal guys, they took all their deals back in 2004. So as soon as they took their deals, the state tried to assert their position. And so the state was already trying to assert their position, because at that time, we had got a 5-3 filter that was talking about the indictments, and that, telling Northerners and Norteños and even NF members to stay out of this conflict that's going on between them and the feds, and that once the dust settles, justice will prevail. In other words, what they were saying was, don't get caught up in this power struggle going on between the state and feds. It's going to all work their way out. So when I seen filter, I was seeing, see, we're getting different filters. We're getting filters that this person was supposed to be in charge of this over here. And then we were getting filters from the old leadership that were saying, no, these guys are on freeze. They have no authority. They have no jurisdiction. So it's very conflicting. It's like, who do you follow? Who do you go with? So you just fall and file with where you can.
Okay. Now, something else I want to ask you. When you hear, like, when I hear the term NF, I often just think of prison. Now I understand that the NF, eventually did make its way to the street. So during your day, like, how widespread was the NF? I mean, did they have Northern California on lock? Like, did they do business with like motorcycle gangs, or anybody who came to Northern Cali wanted to set up shop? Would they have to, first get cleared through the NF or pay tribute to the NF or anything like that?
That's a good question. See, the NF's whole agenda is to its people, is to govern its people. It's kind of like Italian mob, where Italian mob is going to just basically function within their Italian communities. So the NF's agenda is to control its Norteño communities, right? And if you can branch out into working hand in hand with any type of other organizations, if it's beneficial towards you, then of course, there's different business dealing going on with different types of Mexican nationalists, different types of car clubs, different types of motorcycle clubs. It's just big. It's just business. And so, but each regiment is different at that time. You could have, like, in one area, you may have 2 or 3 different regiments in that area that they're not supposed to interact or have any dealings with each other. So all Northern California, you don't know how many active regiments that you have out there on the streets. You don't know, because it's not your business. Like I said, you don't stick your nose in business that doesn't concern you or your regiment, because it's a breach of security. You have a small crew over here that's only like 3 or 4 individuals, and they're reporting just to one. They may be all NR members, but they're reporting to one general up there in the feds or the state, and they're being told, these are the directives that they're being told, and they're not to expose their hand. You may have over here a primary regiment over here, of someone whose presence is known out there, and this is their responsibility. You may have this crew over here. You have different things going on that you don't know. You don't know who they're reporting to. You don't know who's in charge of that regiment. You don't even know who the members are. You're not supposed to know. And see, that's the problem that happened post Black Widow that started happening is a lot of these regiments started interacting with each other. Therefore, when someone told, it brought down the whole regiment.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that was the purpose.
So it's not supposed to happen, but it was starting. It's not supposed to happen, but it started happening because I could look at the case Operation Valley Star, which Salinas had about 4 or 5 different regiments reporting to them. They had San Francisco, they had someone in Stockton, they had, out there in the Valley, they had all these different regiments reporting to them, and it ended up being one of the persons that started flipping was from Stockton, but was working as an informant. So there's always a breach of security whenever you have different regiments intertwining with each other, which is supposed to be a no-no. But see, after Black Widow, things just started to change a little bit, because there was a monetary purpose. and everybody was vowing for power. So if people are vowing for power or trying to elevate their rank and status, what are they going to do? They're going to find whatever leadership they feel is going to prevail, and they're going to be loyal to that. And that leadership is going to use those individuals to advocate their purpose out there in the streets.
Okay. All right. Now let me ask you this, switching gears here just a little bit. You take the average NF members, what's generally going to be their fate? Are they going to live to retire? Are they going to spend the rest of their life in their prison? Are they going to die? Or are they going to flip? Like what's generally happens to an NF member long term?
I say you have about 3 different options. One, you probably have either they're going to end up catching a life sentence, or some long time prison sentence. You just look in the history. The last 15 years, there's been indictments after indictments, people catching 20, 30 years, 40 years, even life sentences. So that's a common theme, is that there's no way around it. And then a lot of the NF members that are in the state, a lot of them are already doing life sentences already. Right. But I see more likely either someone's going to end up doing a life sentence, or they're going to flip. The organization used to do a lot of, they used to clean house a lot, right? And what I mean by that was they would take out their those defectors, but a lot of that brought nothing but heat, indictments, people flipping, people tilling. So it's less of a priority to take out these individuals defected, because you have thousands of people that have already told and flipped in the last 15 years. So if your purpose, it serves no purpose to bring heat on any type of regiment, on the organization, if you just start going out there going wild, whacking people. Because every time that starts to happen, people just get indicted. And where does the organization go? It just gets it back.
Now, I want to ask you, guess it's kind of like a philosophical question, I guess. Now, thinking back, going to the mindset of you were like back when you were on the street doing your thing. Now you look at today, you hear about all these drug companies, getting in trouble because they overprescribing medications, opioid addiction, and these drug companies are making like billions of dollars. And then they were giving doctors kickbacks to, the more prescriptions they prescribe, they'll get bonuses. Was there philosophically, was that really anything different than what you was doing on the street? Isn't it kind of like the same thing? I mean, how do you view that? Like when you hear about these news stories of these drug companies making billions of dollars and causing this opioid epidemic, how does that look to you?
Well, see, the thing about that, I get where you're coming from. It's a corrupt behavior, but see, all these big corporations, what do? How do they make their money? They make money off of U.S. policy. Policies and laws that come forth. So what they did was technically not illegal. So that's the thing. That's the difference between what we were doing. We were out there like involved in illicit activities, from like extortion to illegal drug trafficking to prostitution to debt collecting, whatever it may have been. Whatever was gonna fatten our pockets and generate money, by all means necessary, we did. So these corporations, I look at it as corrupt. They're doing damage to these communities, and they needed to do a little bit more research as far as into prescribing these drugs, because there's a lot of drug addiction based upon these opioids. But technically, it's we're falling victim to government policy.
Right. I mean, it's just fascinating to me, because like now, you think about all the people who've done time over marijuana. Now marijuana is legal in the states, making big money off the taxes of it. It was just kind of ironic to me, to see that happen.
Well, it's just like you just said, marijuana was illegal. So now that it's legal, how did it get legal? Government policy. Laws change. So that's when corporations come in. Whenever they see a law that benefits them, it's like back in World War II days. How do people get rich? They get rich off new policies. And one of the biggest policies that we had back then was that we needed new generators. So a lot of individuals, I know an individual, he started taking old Dodge car batteries, and he turned them into generators and started making a profit off it because it was needed. So whatever policies are being enforced by the government, right? All these prescription companies, it's all big business, whatever it is. The difference is they found a way to legalize it. The things that we were doing as far as a corrupt organization was we were doing illegal activities. You know, now there may be ventures to involve yourself in a legalized dispensary. You know, there's different, you know what I mean? Whereas before you couldn't do things like that. You know, yeah, we were selling weed back then. So yeah, I get what you're saying, you know, but you really got to look at it. Like I said, it all comes down to US policies and laws. So if you're a corporation and you can take advantage of these policies and laws, you're going to do it. It's just like when you file your taxes, you're looking for the biggest tax break you can get. So even though it's corrupt what they did, it was legal what they did.
Right, right. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your transition away from the organization. Like, I know you got caught up in like, it was like political, but like, how was it for you to mentally make that transition? Like I said, I've been banging all these years. Now I'm trying to get out. Like, what was that like for you? Did you have doubts? Did you have reservations about getting out?
You know, it was really difficult. You know, my defection became really, really personal. And there was a lot of anguish. There was a lot of upset feelings. There was a lot of, you know, self-guilt in myself and just the path that I was taking and the way I went about it was very, it was very it fit onto my addiction. I started using on a level that was really, really high, you know, because for years you assemble, see, there's that term that people use, career. Your career is basically your credentials behind the walls, you know, what positions you had, what your status is, and the things that you've done. And you know, contrary to what the bylaws say, a lot of us like to feel our career. We like the recognition we get with it. So when you go from an individual on the street that, you know, I'm not trying to make myself be any more relevant, you know, like within the organization, I was basically nobody, but the organization is a very small organization. So within the Norteño Collective, I was somebody. So out there on the streets with the young homies or other NR members or other Norteños in these hoods, you know, my word carried a lot of weight. I was well respected and honored. So when you go from people looking at you as a big homie and respected, you know, regardless of them understand, a lot of them don't understand the inner workings of the dirty politics and situations that happen and so forth. So when you start to do what's best for you, for whatever reason, people aren't going to understand it. So for me, the biggest thing for me was I was always trying to self-justify why I did what I did or why I walked away. You know, however I spend it, it didn't matter because people weren't going to understand that. And for years, it was a rough transition because my ego got in the way. I was worried about what this small percentage of the United States population, I was worried about what this, you know, collective thought of me, you know, instead of what society thought of me, but the changes that I do make now. So for years, I was suffering out there in the streets, and it brought me to some, you know, lonely places, you know, met with desperation, and I decided to make some changes in my life. You know, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was like, wow, why am I worried about what others think of me? Especially a population that is involved in, you know, filling our streets with drugs, you know, breaking up families, sending young kids into prison, you know, that has no type of care about the betterment of its people. Why should I care what this underworld, this criminal lifestyle, you know, why should I worry about what they think of me? You know, because in the rest of the world's eyes, they're looked at as thugs, dope fiends, and scandalous individuals. The criminals. You know, there's no way to spin that different. You can say, oh, they're from the hood, they lived a tough life. No, you can go out there, you can make a change. So why should I start to worry about what these people think of me if I'm no longer living that life? So that was something that I came to terms with 9 years later. I started thinking about like, wow, like, you know, the term no good. Well, why should I care what this less than 1% of the world population thinks about me? Because they're living a lifestyle where they're out there smoking on the pipe in the room, gossiping or talking about their glory days or getting drunk on the weekends, or their kids are in CPS or they're locked up and their lady's cheating on them. Why should I worry about that whole corrupt life? But for years, it's when you come accustomed to it, you're used to being a person.
So like now, so even today, like, you know, you do these and you see these comments and people in the comment sections, all these guys are rad, this guy's a coward. What do you think of people who do stuff like that?
Well, but see, you know, to be personal, I'm gonna be real about that, man. Like, Basically, it's basically cell soldiering. You know what I mean? It's basically internet warfare. You know, I mean, what do you get out of it? Like, do you really feel that important that you have this person's name in their mouth that you got to sit there and talk about them?
Right.
You know, what are you actually doing? Because a real one's going to creep. A real one's not going to say nothing. They're going to be about their business. So when I see all this stuff, and sometimes it's from people, man, like, you know, I could put a whole bunch of people out there blast. I know a whole bunch of things about a whole bunch of people that have done some things that, man, their career should be deemed no good at this time. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And they're always the first ones to make those comments or gossip. You know what I mean? You know, I heard one individual that was talking about me not that long ago. I'm thinking in my head, man, didn't you testify in '94 when you got jumped? You know what I'm saying? On the stand as a juvenile. And I didn't do nothing about it. You know what I mean? I could have deemed you no good back then, but because I had a liking for your brother, and even though me and you had a bad relationship when we were kids, I still gave you a pass on that. And now you're going to talk about me? Yeah, you were on the stand telling. You know, so you got all kinds of individuals with their own skeletons out there. So a lot of them don't feel comfortable with themselves. So when they get a chance to attack you for whatever you did, for what was in your best interests, they're going to do it. Jealousy and envy. You know, I live a better life today. Whatever I did, I've come to terms with it. For years, I had a hard time with it because it just wasn't me. Now I'm like, wow, I got a 7-year-old son that I have full custody of that has special needs. That I'm involved in all this school stuff, and you know.
So if
I
you,
do his homework.
Heard of like a young guy
take him
came
to
to you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was saying, like, say if you was ever to meet an individual and he's talking about, yeah, I'm a Norteño, now I'm working my way up through the ranks, you know, my goal is to become an NF member. Like, what would you say to someone like that?
See, when I'm doing these interviews, right, it's not me trying to glorify the lifestyle or anything like that, right? So a lot of these people, you know, I'm trying to present information. You know what I'm saying? This is my experience. This is what happened to me. This is what I seen. You know what I mean? Some of these things that I speak of, I may have not been a part of the decision making, but I was informed on these decisions. I did see what occurred. I did see a lot of these reports. I was in communication about a lot of these situations. So what I try to do is, okay, look, this is what this lifestyle happens. This is where it could lead you. This is what occurs. This is what happened with me. This is what happened with this individual over here. The truth is in the testimony. So when you provide all this information, right, to these individuals, you're giving them information to where they can make their own decision. And so what I tell any individual, right, if you're willing to do life, right, if you're willing to have to be involved in the politics, the conniving, the manipulation, the control mechanism, and all that stuff, and you're fine with all that, then by all means go full-fledged if that's what you feel. Right? But if it's not in you, it's advice that you get these facts out there for people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not a promoter of SNY. I'm not a promoter of actives. I'm not a promoter of any of that. I'm a promoter of change, if that makes sense to you. So if someone's an active ordiner, I know a lot of active ordiners that I actually talk to. You know what I'm saying? And I never discouraged them from going, to tell them to go SNY or going active. Not one time. You know what I'm saying? If anything, I tell them what the lifestyle is about and how to go about making their own choices and how to make a decision and how to, even if you get involved in there and you go to jail, about the importance of trying to stay within the political confines to where they don't cross themselves up, but they don't overcommit themselves either. You know, I'm not here to try to speak any poison, because, you know, sometimes people on here, like on the comments, will say, oh, he's contrary to the cause. He's speaking poison. He's saying this and that. Everything I'm saying is positive. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a supporter of any SNY gangs, right? I'm not a supporter of SNY. I'm not a supporter of actives. You know what I'm saying? I'm a supporter of change. I hope any of these individuals, with the exception of pedophiles, child predators, I have no sympathy towards them. But all these other individuals, I hope they can make a change and find their way. You know what I'm saying? So people get misconstrued that, like, that I'm on here trying to bash the NF or trying to bash the MA or trying to bash these. No, I'm not trying to bash anybody. I'm just stipulating facts, because when you look at, you know, when you look at the structure of what these causes are about, the NF cause and the Norteño cause is about, you know, it looks beautiful. You know what I'm saying? It's a worthy and just cause, but it's man-made, being applied by man-made individuals. And anytime you have man-made individuals, we're not without fault. You're going to have people who are disloyal. You're going to have people that are corrupt. You're going to have people that are going to betray you. So it's inevitable that corruption is going to exist, right? So that's the thing that I try to instill in anybody, you know, when I'm speaking to an interview or doing all this stuff, you know, I'm trying to be of service so I can let the listener know that this is what the life's about. Now you have information. Now you can make a decision of what you decide to do with your life. One way or another, it doesn't affect me. I live a good life. I'm outside the mix. I'm outside of the Bay Area. I don't live anywhere near here. I'm not interacting with anybody, you know. But from my recovery and my basis of what I do, I try to give back in ways to where I can to compel them to make that change, and that's up to them. So if someone wants to live that life, they want to be that gangster, they want to be that John Gotti, I get it. You know, that's how I was 20 years ago. I wanted to be that guy. And I was willing to do whatever. But I didn't have anybody trying to lace me or give me any information that's like, okay, to give me something to think about. Therefore, I made decisions that, hey, that were not in my best interest. And once I was exposed to what this life was really about, I was already too far deep into this. Right. You know, sometimes we get too sharp for our own good. We start to hear these things about a cause, and, you know, whether it be like the Black Panthers or all these other different causes and movements, it all starts with a good cause. It sounds good. But then what ends up happening is you have individuals, either they start using drugs or they start down for power or they get corrupt. And that's how these organizations or movements crumble. You know what I'm saying? So for me, that's my whole thing when I try to advocate, okay, take care of your family, take care of yourself, be a man, make right choices. You know, if you get out and get a second chance at life, do the right thing. You don't have to go out there and decide to run the streets and commit crimes. You know, you don't have to go out there and gangbang when you get older. You can be a family man. You know, I wish for myself that, you know, at times I wish for myself that I would have never got involved in the politics, but my path I chose has led me to where I am today. So therefore I have no regrets. For a while I had regrets. For a while I was like, wow, you know, man, I can't, you know what I mean? But now I pretty much live a more meaningful and fulfilling life today.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. So as we close, I just want to ask you one last question. I meant to ask this earlier. When you think of the NF, if you could think of like one historical individual who stands out to you, who would that be and why?
There's a whole bunch of them. Historical, I think of Babo. I think of Death Row Joe. I think of Crackers from Fresno. You know. And why
did they name
all these individuals? Because they all played a part in our history of where the organization went. You know what I mean?
Okay.
You know, Crackers and Joker from I forgot where it was, Redonda or something like that. And you know, they were the ones that took out Cheyenne from the inmate. You know, Death Row Joe, he was the one that wrote the Constitution.
Okay.
Babo was one of the high-ranking generals that took the organization to the 70s. So there's a whole lot of historical figures, even all the individuals in the Black Widow investigation. You know, those are all historical figures. Brown Bob, you know, he co-author of the bonds. Plus he was, you know, so you have all these individuals. There's not one person I think is historical. I mean, each one of them has a place in the NF history.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to close. I'd like to really thank you for taking out your time to bring us this history. I really enjoyed listening to you. You know, it's very informative. I'm sure our audience got a lot out of it. So I just wanted to appreciate you for coming on to PNG and sharing your story with us. I'm sure a lot of people got a lot out of it. I know I did.
Oh yeah, most definitely, man. Subscribe to my boy PNG Media. You know, like his page, you know, support the brother right here, man. He's trying to put some more content, man. And, you know, I'm a full supporter of what you're trying to do, man. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you coming on. We may have to do this again. I can listen, you know, you should really think about putting your story in a book sometime, you know, because I'm sure a lot of people really like to hear your story.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think my life's that important sometimes. You know what I mean? I'm not, you know, I can tell, I got a good story because, you know what, I was there through a lot of these changes and stuff. So, and I was privileged to a lot of information. So, and I'm one who retains information. I don't forget things, you know? So yeah, okay. I've thought about it.
All right. Well, yeah, well, definitely, you know, if you ever do bring out a book, I'll welcome you back to come anytime and talk about it.
Well, most definitely.
All right, brother. You have a good one. Take care.
All right.